Uh, Dr. Umangji, we can start now.
Yes,
Hello.
sir.
Vice Chairman sir has also joined.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon and namaste to all. I, Dr. Umang, on behalf of ITS Mohanagar Ghaziabad, extends a very welcome to distinguished eminent professor Lance Fungser, Honorable Vice Chairman, ITS The Education Group, Shri Arpit Chadha sir, Director IT and UG, Dr. Sunil Kumar Pandey sir, Vice Principal UG Campus, Professor Nancy Sharma, and all my faculty colleagues and student participants of today's session entitled Writing Research Papers for a Productive Academic Career. Being a researcher, today a bit of dichotomy. As a researchers, now we have easier and quicker access to an unprecedented amount of information from around the world. On the other hand, we are working in the research environment as well. In fact, researchers have better, broader, and faster access to more information and technology than at any other time in history. And there is necessary to utilize the resources effectively to fulfill the full promise of research as a growing learner. By keeping this view, today this session is planned. Now I request our Director IT and UG, Dr. Sunil Kumar Pandey sir, under whose guidance our department is flourishing, to kindly deliver welcome address. Sir, over to you, please, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Umangji. Respected Vice Chairman ITS Education Group, Shri Arpit Chadha sir. The eminent guest of this special session, Professor Lance, dear faculty members and students. On behalf of Institute, Professor Fang, I welcome you. And we also welcome our Honorable Vice Chairman, ITS Education Group, Shri Arpit Chadha sir, for sparing time and joining us in this very important session, which is kept on how to present our research work and how to make academic career productive. In fact, in academia, we all know that academic progression involves a number of factors, but the most important factor on which mostly the emphasis is given. Hello, Dr. Umang, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Okay, so in academic pursuit, we all know that one of the most important factors which creates an aura of a faculty or a student is how much engaged we are in research work. Many times it happens that we are involved in learning new things. We are involved in our research endeavors. But many a times it happens that because we are not aware how to present our research work, how to frame that entire research in a format which is globally acceptable at every place. Number of times it happens that we are not able to present ourselves in a way which could be. And it's very important that we understand how to conduct research, number one. And then after conducting research, how to present the research, how to frame that entire research work in the form of a research paper. When we had discussion with Professor Fang, in fact, we were trying to find out a certain theme for this session. And then in such a competitive scenario where we as an academics, a person from academics, we are expected to get engaged into research activities. We are expected to be well versed with the way how an internationally acceptable research paper could be written, how research work could be presented in a form which is acceptable at different forums. It was very important that for faculty and students, this is something which is of common interest for everyone. When I shared this with our vice chairman, sir, though currently he is too much occupied, but and still he was in a meeting, but he made sure that he is with us. Sir, on behalf of the Institute, we welcome you, and we are really thankful to you for joining us here. Professor Fang, I'm confident that towards the end of the session, when we will be formally closing this interaction, we all will have different perspective, and we all will be very much enriched the way these research activities could be conducted and presented in an impressive form. I once again, on behalf of Institute, I welcome you and we look forward for a wonderful knowledge enriching session, sir. Dr. Umang, it's over to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your words. ITS, the education group, is achieving excellence of success under the leadership of our Vice Chairman, ITS, the education group, Shri Arpit Chadha, sir, who always motivates to do excels in life. Shri Arpit Chadha is an alumnus of Scindia School and University of Delhi. He has completed post-graduation in business administration. Under the visionary leadership of Vice Chairman Sir, ITS, the education group, is creating benchmarks in the field of higher education to be followed by others and is committed to provide high quality education and to serve the underprivileged segment of society. Sir has recently elected as Vice President of GMA. He is an active member of various professional bodies, include FICCI, CEGR, IMA, ICCI, ICPA, and contributing in the growth and promotion of education, research, and sports in the country, including Table Tennis Association, Chess and Sports Association of Ghaziabad as Vice President and Patron-in-Chief, Karate Welfare Society. Recently, Shri Arpit Chadha sir was awarded with Most Preferred UG and PG Institute of the Year by Bharat Ratna Padam Vibhushan, His Excellency ex-President Shri Pranab Mukherjee ji in New Delhi during ASSOCHAM 12th Education Conclave. He has been, yes sir,
Dr. Umang ji.
Really thankful for the introduction. I would not like to keep everyone waiting. Respected Professor Lance Fung, it's a delight to have you in today's session. If I may call it, we can say this post-COVID era, because vaccinations have started. I've myself got the vaccine today. So let's hope for the best. And it's a very interesting topic, very interesting initiative taken by the director, Dr. Sunil Pandey, who's been a real asset for the organization, working for more than 20 years and has got laurels to this institution. Congratulations and thanks to Dr. Pandey for initiating this beautiful topic today. Writing research papers for a productive academic career. I can put it in two ways. Productive academic career for whom? It is, if you ask me, for a teacher, yes, of course. But more than a teacher, I believe for a student as well. We are in this education industry, education for more than 25 years now. I've always said in different platforms that backbone for any education institution is a teacher. This is a great initiative, more so because the more educated, the more qualified, the more learned a teacher is, would ensure that a student gets the best out of it. That's why I really like this topic, helping in research, and who better than a professor who's done it, who's endless research being done by Professor Lance. And it's truly an honor to have you, Mr. Lance, amongst us today. And I'm sure this webinar, this seminar would end up in great fruitful points and would be useful for each one of us. And all the teachers would have a lot of takeaways. My best wishes to all. Good luck. Once again, congratulations, and thanks, Dr. Pandey, for initiating this research talk by Dr. Fung. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for your enlightening words. And let me take an opportunity to introduce our distinguished speaker of today's session, Professor Lance Fung, sir. Professor Emeritus Lance Fung Chiju Fung received a general certificate in marine radio communication from the Hong Kong Polytechnic in 1974 and higher diploma in marine electronics from Brunel Technical College, UK in 1976. After served as a radio and electronic officer in the Merchant Navy, he continued his study at the University of Wales and graduated with a bachelor degree in maritime technology with first-class honor and a Master of Engineering in Technology in System Test Technology in 1981 and 1982, respectively. He lectured at Singapore Polytechnic in the Department of Nautical Studies and the Department of Electronics and Communication Engineering between 1982 to 1988. Subsequently, he worked in the School of Electrical and Computer Engineering, Curtin University, Perth from 1989 to 2003, while completing his PhD at the University of Western Australia in 1993. He was an associate professor in the School of Information Technology, Madras University from 2003 and was appointed as Professor Emeritus in 2015. In September 2017, Lance received an honorary degree in Information Technology from Valak University, Thailand in recognition of his contributions towards the development and advancement advancement of their research and postgraduate programs. Lance has been active member of IEEE for over 2 decades and is the current chair of IEEE Region 10 Education Activities Committee. He is also the immediate past chair of IEEE New Initiatives Committee, the IEEE Conference Quality Committee, and their technical program committees. His research interest in the development and applications of innovative intelligent technologies to practical problems. Lance has authored and co-authored over 380 plus articles in refereed journals and conference proceedings. He has also supervised over 30 doctoral students to the completion. We welcome you, sir, on this forum and request you to please address the gathering.
Okay, thank you very much for the introduction and the invitation. So can I start sharing my screen now so that you can see from my
Yes,
presentation?
please, sir.
Yes.
Okay, you
Yes,
can see
sir.
my
Yes,
screen
sir.
now,
Yes,
right
sir.
now? Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, if you can see my
Yes,
screen
sir.
now, what I do is I take away my video so that you can concentrate on the presentation. Okay, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. And I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the invitation organized by Dr. Yu Mang, Associate Professor, Department of IT of ITS, Mohan Nagar, and Ghaziabad, India. And I also thank you for the introduction and also by invitation by Shri Abid Chedda, and then also for all the eminent speakers and also the management, colleagues, staff, and also students. Well, for the topic for today, well, is the writing research papers, well, for the productive academic career. So I must first of all, well, clarify that even though I'm carrying the head of being the IEEE Region 10 Asia Pacific Director-elect for 2021 and 2022, and but I clarify that, well, this is entirely my own opinion, and they're not necessarily the opinion of IEEE. So although I know that, well, when I hear the introduction, well, I hope that you won't be too disappointed that I'm not really speaking too much on how to write the papers, but rather I would like to look behind it. I would like to look behind what is really behind the writing, and also what are the considerations, in particular in terms of your planning, in terms of the value, and also what do you think, well, that the reviewers are expecting. So I'm hoping to touch on that aspect. Okay, so because I do believe that writing is really an art rather than a science, in the sense that, well, it's quite difficult for me to claim that I'm able to, well, to teach you everything, well, within just within an hour or so. Even I myself, I would not consider myself is really an excellent writer as such. But I will talk a little bit about my personal experience. But I also like to clarify that I do see that the things are changing rapidly around the world, and hopefully that I believe that you all will be also better prepared for that as well. So I look at the audience. I believe that, well, among you, you have the undergraduate and postgraduate students. So I would like to encourage you and try to instill with you some kind of a goal, and also, well, the planning that, well, really right from the beginning, while you are at the beginning stage, well, of your career, well, not necessarily only in academic, it could be industry, it could be research career, but writing is a very important aspect of your work. So, and also, well, addressing for the early careers, well, researchers and scholars, well, which I have been, well, once until I retired, well, a couple of years ago. Even though that I'm still involved, well, as an emeritus professor, I still have the opportunity to co-supervise a student. Even this morning, well, we have a teleconference, well, co-supervising a student in China. So things are really, well, happening since 2020 of the COVID-19. Well, even though that we have a lot of restriction, but nevertheless, it also opened up a lot of opportunities. And I also, well, look at this seminar is maybe anyone interested in the research and the publication. And I can also talk a little bit about some of the things that are happening in IEEE itself, because last night and the night before, we just have some presentation from the Conference Publication Committee and also from the IEEE Products and Services Committee as well. So it's quite interesting that even though that it appears that the COVID-19 has restricted all the travel, but in terms of the publication, in terms of the number of downloads, actually it has not been slowed down, actually even increased as well. So it's a very interesting, well, the development going on. So the agenda today is I'm quickly go through a little bit, well, getting to know myself, which you have already kindly, well, mentioned about some of my past work. Well, I just simply repeat it, and also I point to you that where you can find some of my information. In particular, I would like to show you that, well, looking at the terms of productivity and also the being a productive career, then, well, there are some kind of measures, and maybe I just share with you that maybe you can take a look well, I'm not trying to use myself as an example, but I'm just showing that our university has some kind of measures on that one. So then I go back to the fundamentals. Is why should we really write and publish? Actually, this was a question being asked, well, by your directors, Sri Abid Chanda. Well, who are you writing for? So why you want to write it? I think it's very important. You have to get yourself clear up from the very beginning. And then, well, I stress the point is very important. You must plan for it. And also you have to consider the different venues to publish your work. I'll also mention in terms of some of the expectations from the management now, there's actually place a lot of pressure on the staff and the students. So maybe I just give some advice and maybe just some recommendation or encouragement to you. So you really need to consider the venues very important in terms of the conferences and the journal. And also one of the things haven't been mentioned earlier on is in terms of my involvement with the conference in IEEE. Well, I have been involved with the conference quality committee and also in the technical program integrity committee for a few years. So there are certain expectations. Maybe this is the one answer some of the question that maybe why some of the papers you consider, well, have been rejected, and also maybe some of the issues we see from our IEEE point of view. And then finally, I came across one article that's from someone. Well, although he is not really a very highly productive person in the sense that, well, he's a beginner in that sense, but nevertheless, the article is quite interesting. He listed 10 academic productivity tips, and I would think it's quite appropriate because I myself look at it, really, I would say that I have adopted some of those tips, well, in my earlier life as well. So I hope that this is going to be useful for you. So first of all, my affiliation currently is with Murdoch University, which is located in Perth, Western Australia. And if you take a look at the map, actually we are the closest neighbor compared to the other side of the Australian continent. Because I'm the west coast, actually on the edge of the Indian Ocean. And well, in case you're not aware of Western Australia, well, in Perth, we have a population of around 2 million people. Our state of WA is around 2.4 million people or so. Well, we have the beautiful Swan River. So Murdoch University is the second oldest university within the state. And well, we are located on the south of the river. As you can see, well, this is the picture that on the Swan River overseeing the CBD area. But what I would like to point out is really this animal you see on the lower right-hand corner. Well, if you look at it clearly, actually it's a black swan. So this also appears on our well, state flags as well as an emblem of our state animal. But why I say black swan is very interesting in the sense that because years ago, people never expect that swan is going to be black color. So until the European will come to other parts of the world to realize that swan can be black color. So they have been affiliating these particular terminologies with some events. Well, they never expected, and it's going to have a lot of implication. So now this is some terms are called the black swan effect or black swan phenomenon or black swan theory, etc. So the COVID-19 is exactly a part of it. So how does it affect your academic career? I do believe that there's a certain degree of implication in particular, well, for your publication and presentation, because it really opened up a lot of value, well, at this moment of time. But coming back, well, to getting to know me, I would say the nearest one, easiest one is, well, you can take a look at my university webpage. You just simply search, well, Murdoch University, Lance Fung, and then you'll come to this page. Because our university encourage, well, each staff, research and academic staff will have their personal page and a lot of the write-up. And I'm using some of these, well, information on these pages to show you, well, how can you measure, well, how do you measure some kind of productivity, well, in terms of your academic career? So on the personal background, it has already been mentioned earlier on that I really started off with as a radio marine officer. And well, you can see the first picture was my first ship, the second ship. And then, well, I started off my master's degree in UK, in Wales. Well, why I use some of these photos is not only that I always try to remember how I looked when I was young, but nevertheless, well, I think it's very significant. Take a look in terms of the technology that have been evolved over the years. Well, the first picture is, well, when I was on the first ship in 1974, well, I was using a wireless Morse code as a mode of communication. And we have the transmitter is around 1 kilowatt we can transmit. But nevertheless, well, we can communicate. Well, I remember this one case. I was on the southern part of Africa, outside Cape Town, and I'm able to communicate all the way to London, with Morse code. It's really amazing. I can't remember exactly, maybe 8 megahertz or maybe 12 megahertz band. although you have a lot of static, but I'm able to send a message out across the world using the wireless technology. And that is exactly what Marconi had been doing over 100 years ago when it first started. And then my second photo, it was the second ship. Well, what a significant point, well, although I may not be able to show in here, is one of the equipment I have observed. Well, from the Morse code in 2 years' time, 1974, 1976 on my second ship, we have already started to have the satellite signal coming in as the emergency communication. Now, not really as a satellite system, what we have, radio telephony nowadays, not as advanced. But I'm talking about, 1976, we're beginning to have that. And as a matter of fact, in 1997, actually, this role of the radio officer is completely, disbanded. There's no longer required because, since the satellite communication is so mature. Then the second picture, the last picture I have, it was taken when I was doing my master's degree in 1981. And that was the time that I first encountered, my project was on microprocessor. It was a Motorola 6800 microprocessor. And then I developed some kind of automatic testing system. So it's around 40 years ago when I first encountered microprocessor. So looking back, when I take a look, all these, past 40 years or so, how technology have changed from the wireless technology, going to radio telephony, go to satellite. And then we're looking into the microprocessor. Nowadays, everything, you have the embedded system in there, the IoT, you're looking at the autonomous vehicle. So it's really advancing so rapidly. So now I put a challenge to all of you within the academic, or maybe you are a student. Really, what are you going to anticipate for the time to come? Well, even since the time I retired, 5 years ago, I was working a lot on the AI and the computational intelligence. And now you can see that really now they're even teaching coding of all these AI systems down to the even school level. So really it's no longer just limited to the research or to the higher education. So by the same token, you see that, technology has been changing rapidly. So how do we come to this stage? Obviously, it's through publication, because it's a sharing of the knowledge, sharing of the information that people get to know and people get to develop it along the way as well. So this has been a slight background of my personal encounter. In terms of IEEE, this was a document I used when I was doing my election last year, but they give you a list of some of my involvement in the past. But the main thing is I would like to point out that I've been involved in some of the committees, like the New Initiatives Committee, which you have heard. This is the one that we have been supporting a lot of the new initiatives. So I strongly encourage, if you are an IEEE member, even if you are not, you can take a look some of those new emerging technology under the Future Direction Committee of IEEE. This will give you some kind of a foresight and maybe some prediction what's going to happen in the technology in time to come as well. We support projects. Even years ago, we support the smart grid. We support the BRAIN initiative. We support the cybersecurity. We have the bio. So a lot of work we have been supported by this initiative, all in terms of $1 million or so. And also in terms of the conference aspect. So this is where maybe related to some of the talk we have today is in terms of the publication, is my involvement as a conference quality committee, technical program committee, as you can see for a few years. Even right now, I'm still involved some of the aspect of the conference or committees as well. But coming back to, the website and also the topic, in terms of the productive academic career, so maybe we have to go back to the terms of how do we define productive. So I just find it online, this is the definition. The word productive often describes the person's capability to do a lot of work, but this can refer to anything that produces a lot. The land in the areas might be the most productive in the state, meaning crops will grow very well then. And productive can also be used broadly to describe something that produces positive results. So maybe in India, you can relate to that because you have a lot of agricultures going on to support your vast population. So same thing in terms of academic. So how do we measure it? So of course, writing paper is one, but I also see that another one is maybe, the number of students you're able to help them, to nurture them, but that's also very important. So in terms of the publication, if you look into, my university website, we have a collection of the number of publications we have produced over the years. In Murdoch University, which I have been started working in 2003, so they have collected 333 articles, 337 articles, so far. So we have still a few coming in as well. you can, most of these, you can download it. Well, I think 61% you can download the full papers. I find it is useful in the sense that because, well, you don't necessarily need to subscribe to some of those articles, although some of them you still need to pay, well, because if you have assigned the copyright to them. But a lot of them, they're open access, so that means that you can download it. So this could be a way where you can see it as some kind of productivity in the sense that we are able to share our knowledge, share our output to the rest of the world as well. So you can also see that in terms of my university, we collect some kind of statistic on this. Now, I find this is particularly useful in helping the staff in maintaining their profile to the public. So according to my university, as far as this 337 articles they have collected, it has been downloaded, according to here, 737 times. And 61% of these articles are full text. You can download the full paper. And also on the right-hand side, they also have collected what have been my most downloaded articles. Some of those have been downloaded over 5,473 times and 3,000 something times, etc. Well, admittedly, some of these may be related, some of the subjects where our university teaching, in particular, things like the games technology. Our university is is the first actually in the state of WA to launch the game technology course, but that's a few years back now. So that's why some of these. So you can see also, the topic also vary quite a bit as well. Okay, the similarity and difference between the learn through play and edutainment. It was the most downloaded paper, and some others, and the use of ICT on the smart meters, and also the quality evaluations, the conversation agent, etc., etc. So you are more than welcome to take a look at those papers. And also take a look at the most downloaded papers. It's 5,000 something. Well, it has been started. Well, bear in mind that this data was based on 2009 onwards until now. So it's been downloaded 5,473 times, and it has been still ongoing. And then, there's another paper. Well, I use this one as a paper as an example because, you'll see why in the next slide. Well, this was a paper being published in 2008, and it was another student I have from Thailand. And this called Raising the Information Security Awareness in the Digital Ecosystem with Games, a pilot study in Thailand. In terms of the download, it's not a very high number, but it's quite interesting. Well, this paper, because, you make use of a tool, from this US Naval Postgraduate School, they have a Center for Cybersecurity and Cyber Operations. They have these particular games or application tools called Cyber Siege. They use this one to help to educate on cybersecurity. And I'm really pleased to say that, they have included our paper as one of the first paper that we have assessed the effectiveness in education. As you can see, our paper in 2008, and then subsequently the paper 2010, 14, and 2016, etc. from different people. We were the first paper we have demonstrated we make use of the tools, and we published in one of the IEEE conference, in 2008. And in terms of the student, I'm really pleased to say that I have a supervisor to postgraduate, doctorate, PhD, and doctorate IT, and one or two master level as well, completed 31. And also you can see that, my students are from different parts of the world as well. And each of these theses, the key thing is you can download the whole thesis if you want to. They're all public domain information. So you will just go through different topics, different areas from information system, IT, AI, computational intelligence, etc. And interestingly, one of the most downloaded thesis, I found out that it was from one of my students. She's from Bahrain, and the papers, the title was on knowledge management strategic alignment in the banking sector at the Gulf Cooperation Council. GCC countries, and actually it has been downloaded 3,277 times. I was really amazed. Even up to now, there was some download as well. So, but although the papers, from this thesis wasn't really the most downloaded papers, but then again, you can also see there's quite a fair bit of interest have been generated on this thesis. And similarly, those are the information you can find from our university's website. And then, on the other hand, you can also assess someone's research career and also the output or productivity from external sources. The one we can use are things like Google Scholar. So this is the one you see my profile on the Google Scholar. And also I find it quite interesting that even though I have graduated, I have retired in 2015, but actually the citation of my paper is still growing over the years, and I'm really amazed to see that. And according to here, well, you quoted my H index is 29. What it means is, well, I have 29 papers which have been cited over 29 times. So really, this is one of the indicators. But I must say that I am not really an excellent researcher. As I say that I have seen some people, well, there are hundreds of H index. Say, for example, Professor Toshio Fukuda, well, who was the past IEEE president from Japan, and well, he has an H index factor of 90. Okay, well, my other earlier regional director, Professor Kuching Chung from Korea, he got 30. Another one from Singapore, National University of Singapore, Professor Lawrence Wong, he got an H index of 33. So those are the indication. But it's quite interesting to take a look in terms of those papers. As a matter of fact, the one paper I have been cited the most was cited together with my supervisor, my late supervisor, Professor Kippo Wong, in 1993. And this paper has been cited 506 times. And then, well, if I take a look at that paper, I find that even though that paper was published in 1993, it has still received well, citation all the way up to now, even 2021, you see that there was one cited as well. So this is the thing I find is also quite encouraging to see that some of the works we have done around 30 years ago is still being cited. And you can see that some of the years is still being cited. Well, I can't remember exactly how many times, but it's still ongoing. So I would say that this will, I find that, well, this I will consider maybe, hopefully it's really useful contribution to the discipline and knowledge. But there's another one a little bit more closer, 2010 was published, and by Linda Lim. She was from Malaysia, although currently that he has settled down in Western Australia, got a research job in one of the other universities as well. Again, you can see that the paper has been cited over the years, and even up to last year, well, you also have a good number for 2020, or even 10 years later, the citation is still growing. So that particular work was looking at the, well, how does the desktop virtual reality enhanced learning outcomes and structural equations or modeling approach? Well, I can see that, well, the reason is, well, we were one of the papers, one of the earlier papers to use this structural equation modeling approach. And similarly, for my other paper on economic dispatch, we were one of the earliest one while using simulated annealing, which is one of the optimization techniques. And subsequently, there was another student under my supervisor, well, she used evolutionary computing. She also received a lot of citation as well. So the key thing you can see in here is, well, if you are able to demonstrate you're one of the earliest pioneers, well, in using some new techniques in solving some problem. Well, economic dispatch problem actually is an old problem. It's an old problem in power engineering for a long, long time. Traditionally, they just use a linear regression, those kind of methods to solve it, but we use some kind of a search method. Simulated annealing was one. Well, so then well, you just go on from there. So, but people are interested in the technique. And similarly for this, well, up to at that point, well, when we published a paper 10 years ago, actually using the VR is comparatively new. Well, so we have to make use of some other people's software to work on that. But again, nowadays you can see that the VR has been quite, well, comparatively easily accessible and much cheaper, and people can develop VR tools as well. So this is something that you can learn from here as well. Really, when you want to have a paper which is, well, productive, which can be having a long-term effect, that you really need to look for something which is new and innovative. And some others aspect, well, in terms of my profile from the public domain is ResearchGate. ResearchGate is another one to have some similar type of assessment, looking at the H index. Now, bear in mind, sometimes the H index may differ from different platforms because they may collect different set of papers in there. So in the Research Scholar, they say I'm 29, but this one is 23. But actually, in the next one, Scooper, they even say I'm lower than that because of the all dependent number of paper they have collected inside there. But at least, well, I'm pleased to say that in here, well, they quoted my RD score at 29.79. But in here, they say that, well, my score is higher than 87.5%. So in other words, maybe I'm on the 1/8 of the top, well, researcher according to members, well, within this ResearchGate score. So within IEEE Explore as well, well, we also have this the count as well. Okay, they just count number of papers I have. In here, they say 126. As a matter of fact, excuse me. IEEE Explore, actually, there's another called Explore Analytic, which I haven't really explored too much into it, but that one gives you some kind of assessment of the papers and the conferences have been downloaded. Is some of the new tools, and mainly just make available to the organizers and also staff, etc. So, but I haven't got a chance to really explore, well, how you can use to assess the output of the people, but it's more looking at the conferences. And then the other one is Scopus. Well, Scopus is important because, well, this has been used by a lot of government. In this case, well, we coded my number of documents 202, well, in the database, and they say that, well, my H index is 16. And then in here, well, they say that, well, in terms of my citation, actually, it's been growing over the years. Well, it's quite interesting that, well, the blue one is number of documents. As you can see, well, since my retirement, obviously, my number of publications have been dropping quite a lot. But nevertheless, well, the citation be going up. Well, 2021 is a bit low at this moment of time because it's the beginning of the year. So what have we observed? So I'm showing all these things. It's not so much just trying to, well, let you get to know me. And also I'm trying to show you that you can get some of my information from my university website, etc. But I would say that I hope that you can observe, first of all, your publication, they're all in public domain. So this is the one that your profile, your productivity is being measured in the public. And this information can be used to assess one's academic performance or achievement, or maybe implicitly talking about the productivity. And the access of this publication could also be open, well, through the subscription or payment on per item basis. So, well, when you look at my university website, they say that I have 61% of those papers open access. Well, that means that, well, the publisher do not really restrict the access to that. They make it public to everyone. On the other hand, well, traditionally, IEEE has been, well, on subscription basis. And really, that has been one of the major income, well, for IEEE, well, publication and also for the conferences. But nevertheless, well, IEEE is now gradually also moving to open access as well. Although because, well, when you come to open access, a lot of time, because of the publication, I mean, shifted to the author. Well, on that end, the subscription is the payment is really by the by the one who subscribed. A lot of time, maybe the university, maybe the company, well, subscribe it. It's still quite a cost of a bit of money. Although you can also pay for individual, and I think it's around $32 or so per paper, for IEEE papers. So it's still quite a fair bit of money. So, but nevertheless, well, you can also get access, and also not uncommon nowadays, a lot of researchers, they keep their own, well, website or repository, like in my case, well, whereby you can access to those papers. So this is where one of the first things you should really look into, how to assess other people's work, so that to help you yourself to improve your own productivity. So thereby, well, these are now being used as some kind of measurement of one's productivity. Although, well, how you measure it, again, depends very much on the organization and even the government as well. Then I come back to the fundamental question now, why should I really write and publish? Well, I would say that, well, as an academic, especially if you are at the beginning stage of your study and on your career, then I would say that it's really part of the training. And it's really is an ongoing process. And also, well, you also need to write so that you learn the publication process. Well, from the point of identifying, well, where you should publish, well, how to meet all the requirements. Well, you would expect if you have to publish, well, say, for example, like in a conference or maybe in a journal, where they have a very strict guideline in terms of number of papers, a number of pages, in terms of the size of the fonts, in terms of the margin space. All those were things that you need to follow. I must say that nowadays, well, it's much more easier because everything is computer-based. But I can tell you, well, around 30 years ago, when I first started to do my PhD, we do the literally of the cut and paste. Really, we have to print it out, and then we have to cut it, put on the laid out, and then, well, I think it's slightly bigger so that they can shrink down the size as well before we can publish it. So it takes a lot of hard work. And on the other hand, I must say that during that time, we need to be very careful, because if we make a mistake, well, then really we may need to scrap the whole thing. So, okay. But now these are people, well, unfortunately, because it's too easy. So maybe sometimes I see some papers, you can see a lot of, well, grammatical mistake. I can see that, well, not much really work has been put in. And this has been one of the cautions I would advise you to take a look very carefully, that you really don't take it for granted, think that, oh, it's so easy, I can just simply, well, publish it. But really, you have to go down, well, you need to really look at your paper from the reviewer's point of view rather than just you yourself point of view. And then also in terms of the publication, the main thing is, well, you need to validate your results, because we are now in a system based on peer review. In other words, well, your results need to be validated by the peer in a discipline. So that's how we work. That's what we work on. And of course, well, with your output, that will be associated with you forever. Okay. So this is where you build up your credential, your recognition as well. well, maybe in terms of career, they're looking for in terms of career advancement, in terms of the promotion, in terms of even changing job or moving to another country, all those were possibility. You really need to have this public information. Well, I can assure you that as a student, well, it's of course, well, I encourage you to do the best you can well, in your examination, etc. But I can say that well, once well, you have completed well, your examination result, all those things may help you to get your promotion to the next year, or maybe you're getting a scholarship, etc. But once well, you started your career well as a researcher, as academic staff, and nobody will really bother too much about well, what you've done in your examination. But really, your paper is really important. You also need this one to build up your network and the co-workers and collaborators, because well, nowadays it's very unlikely you can do everything by your own. And also you will see later on in the last part of the slide and talk about well, how the 10 tips of this academic productivity tips. Well, actually you see that the co-worker is very important. But I think more importantly, we're going to go back to the fundamentals, well, answers. Why do we want to publish? Because we want to make our contribution to knowledge in the discipline. And as I've said, well, if you take a look at those papers, well, I'm really glad to say that people still looking at it, because we have been one of the earliest people making the suggestion and working on those technology or techniques. So therefore, people may still find it useful, the reference to that. So you have to really find your niche and find out, well, what are you making your contribution? So we must also, well, look into the trends nowadays. I would say that all over the world now, I have been in the academic, well, now looking back over 30 years now. So spending well, around 14 years or so in Curtin, well, 12 years in Murdoch, another 5 years in retirement. But even so that I'm still keeping very close touch with it, because well, last year, say for example, under the COVID-19, well, amazingly, I have been invited to speak over 100 times, close to 100 times, well, in a lot of webinars. I never expect that as well. But nevertheless, well, you see that university management, they now have a growing interest and a focus on this global ranking and justification of the expenses and the investment. So in a way that this is also the pressure given to them from the public, because a lot of time people say that, oh, you guys in the university, you're living in the ivory tower, you're so far away. Because see that, well, you are using the people's money. Well, I know that in India, maybe you have a lot of private university. But on the other hand, well, in our place like in Australia, actually, we only have around two private university, all the rest are state. Although the government does not really fund us 100%, maybe only 50% or so. But nevertheless, well, the general public still consider we are using well taxpayers' money. But therefore, they need to justify, well, they need to quantify what are outputs, and publication is one of it. So that's why they need to have a quantifiable measurement they use to assess and compare the staff performance as well as the institution's performance as well. So the number and the values of the publication have become the goal and the ends of the postgraduate study. So, well, I would say that well, during my time, really, we didn't pay too much attention, well, on this one. But unfortunately, nowadays, it has become one of the minimum requirements, people looking at the publication and also where you publish as well. So I would say that, well, although a lot of time people looking at it at the aims and the goals of the study and research, I would say that, well, do not let it overtake your original objective, okay? You really need to enjoy, you really want to make a contribution. So now coming to the question, if that is the case, well, then what should you do, well, to do as regard the research career? So this is the one that I see that maybe I hope this can help you. You really need to start planning. Okay, you really need to have your plan as far as the writing and the submissions are concerned. So as far as today's topic is concerned, the writing research paper, so I would say that you go back to the fundamental. You must plan first, okay? So you need to have a research plan. You need to have a publication plan. You need to have a networking plan. You have to have a grant and project plan. You have a management plan. Okay, so these are the things. So let me elaborate a little bit more on each one of these. So what do I mean by research plan? So really, I must say that you're never too early to start. Even though that I know that among the audience, there are faculty, students, and young staff as well. But you really have to start from the very beginning. You really have to chart your course. So you need to start, well, if you're looking at a doctorate study. As a matter of even before doctorate study, I can see that nowadays, or even some of the undergraduate students, if they're doing a good project, there's no reason why not they can publish a paper on that. So why you need to have some publication to help you? Because first of all, it helps you in your admission. In particular, it may even help you to getting a scholarship as well. So you need to really write a research proposal properly. And this is really part of your research writing. So during a study, as far as I'm using my university as an example, one of the major writing the student need to do, apart from writing paper, is really the confirmation of candidature. So this is really to confirm, the student is able to become an independent researcher, as part of this postgraduate study. We also require them to have an ongoing milestone as well. We also expect some kind of a regular publication. That will be part of the publication plan, as I mentioned. And then also you need to ask yourself, well in advance, where will this take you? You must really know, where is your goal? Okay, you must be able to visualize, what are you going to do, with your work, and even after your thesis submission. I always ask my student, very big at the beginning, even though that they just started at the beginning, I always ask them, what are you going to do with your PhD degree afterwards? Okay, so what will you say that after you finish? Well, a lot of my students, they have a scholarship from their own university. So when they go back, you need to work for the university. I always ask them, okay, when you go back, what will you tell your president or your rector, your maybe whichever head of your university, or what are you going to do with it? You need to have a plan well in advance. Some of you, maybe consider you can go for a future postdoc study. I think it's quite valid as well, because nowadays we're just doing 3 years degree may not be able to give you quite substantial research output. So it's not uncommon that people also go further in the postdoc study, 1 to 2, 3 years postdoc study. Or maybe, you're looking for academic appointment. Again, this is quite usual, especially in the case of Australia. A lot of students maybe end up working in the academic, although I can tell you this is getting harder and harder. Actually, the number of faculty members position they generate and open up actually is far less than the number of student graduate. So a lot of them, I can see that they should really go into industrial appointment. So because you should really make good use of your work, put in the application. And then, you really need to know that, how your skills, apart from writing paper, that really need to be put into practice, okay, by the industry. Or maybe some of you may be good enough that even a startup. As a matter of fact, a lot of the successful startup, biggest operation, they did not even complete the degree, okay? You may not need that if you have a good idea. But nevertheless, I would say that having the degree, having your research, the experience you learn, actually is going to help a lot. So in terms of the publication plan, so you need to really work out, well in advance, okay? You really, have to have some goals in mind. How many papers you need to publish? Now, it could be based on the requirements, from your study point of view, or maybe even as a faculty member. Actually, even now, our university have some kind of implicit requirements on that. So you really need to have this in mind. And also you need to pace it out accordingly, maybe how often you need to publish. And also, more importantly, you must really have it in mind, what do you intend to publish? So this is where, go back to your research plan, because you must have a very overarching research question that really, which is, you can continue to work on that, for a long time. So you just simply continue having, different solutions being put up, different results being put up. But most importantly, you need to assess, your work compared to the current work as well. You need to read a lot so that you know that your work should be acceptable. Is it really worth publishing? Well, as I said, I have been working in the conference quality committee. And one of the things we assess the quality of those conferences, because we even have the authority to say that, okay, I'm sorry, this particular conference proceeding, even though it's sponsored by IEEE, we are not going to accept this proceeding in Explore. And I would say that it's quite a devastating effect on the authors and on the organizer, because you put in so much work, and then if IEEE tell you that, sorry, we are not going to accept your proceeding in IEEE Explore, you wasted all the time, you wasted all your authors' time. Although it does not happen too often, but unfortunately, we have seen cases like that, because we do see that the technical program committee did not really do the work properly, that whereby we have doubt in terms of the quality of the papers, in terms of the results, retrieval and all those things. But also, it's very important as an author that you really need to be very clear among yourself, because you know that being rejected is one thing, but really, if you really have nothing, if the reviewer consider there's no contribution of the work and they reject your paper, then no matter how hard you try, I would say that you always have a problem, unless some of the venue, we find it a little bit dodgy. They only want the money. So then the next question, where do you publish? So I'm going to answer this question later on with different venues you can consider. And who will you publish with? Well, this is where sometimes you have some kind of co-authors or collaborator work with you. And more importantly, publish the paper is only one thing, and that's not the end of it. You must really start thinking about the other one. And I remember when I was working, a lot of time when we working on grants application, we always say that, well, when you write a grant, actually we have already got the results for the grant, but we're only asking for money so that we can do it further, so we can ask for the next grant. What I'm trying to say is, well, actually, well, before we start the grant application, more or less we have done a fair amount of work. We have a bit of track record. We published quite a fair bit of work in that area so that we gain the confidence of the grants, the one on the committee, they can give us the money. Then we can do it further from that on. So that is not really an end of it. It's really an ongoing. So you must know very clearly, well, how are you going to continue your work? Networking. I've mentioned a few times already about the co-workers or collaborators, etc. So you must be able to identify who are the other researchers working in your area. Now, this is where you see, well, the public domain websites like the ResearchGate, Google Scholar come in as well. A lot of times, those are the ones, say, for example, looking at the Google Scholar, you will also see that, well, apart from the list of my papers, you also see a list of my co-author as well. So this is where you can identify when maybe some of those people, they're working similarly in those work. But then again, it does not mean that, oh, okay, I just write to them, I ask them to publish with them together. No, you really need to be someone, well, they can trust you, you can work with them. You need to have some kind of a equivalent standing as well. There's no point to write to someone, well, okay, a very high standing, you expect the guy you're going to co-author with you. So really, there's no reason why the guy need to be co-author with you. Also looking at geographical location as well. So really, you need to start somewhere. Maybe you can look, well, in my area, okay, in the state of WA, Western Australia, we have 4 public universities: Curtin, UWA, Curtin, and E.D. Carver University. So I study in UWA, I work in Curtin, I work in Murdoch. So I more or less I know 3/4 of the university here in WA already. And then, well, in the IEEE section, I also work with some of the other staff from other university as well. So through that, I know a lot of people. So if I want to read it, I can pick up a phone and just find out 1 or 2 persons. So similarly, I can go further a little bit to the Eastern State, although I don't know so many of them because altogether 38 university is a bit quite a lot of number in Australia. But similarly, in India, you have the same thing as well. You have so many universities, you can find out somebody who is similar in your area. Then you have to identify, is there any chance of the collaboration? You start off by looking maybe some kind of joint research work and publication. And on the other hand, well, people sometimes also looking at help as well. People may invite you to be a reviewer. Well, maybe you also help to organize the conference. So this is where you broaden your network, you get to know people. Editorial team is important. It does take you a lot of time. Well, you need to provide a review, you need a lot of work. But this is where you build up your network, you also build up your credential as well. Sometimes you might be able to have students for the exchange. Well, we also have a study leave, well, maybe in other universities, they call sabbatical leave as well. People also taking this opportunity to visit other universities. I myself, well, have visited to Hong Kong before, or to Singapore, so I also used the opportunity. My supervisor, actually, well, I told you that we were one of the earliest one to work on some optimization techniques in power engineering. He got the idea, well, when he was working in UWA, and he went over to Stanford, well, to do his sabbatical. And from there, actually, he learned, and then he used the idea of AI to apply in power engineering. So this is where he started as well. So maybe, well, bigger grants and project as well. But make sure that, well, when you're asking people for networking, you have to consider, is it going to be a win-win situation? Don't just think that, well, you just write to someone, okay, I want this, I want that, okay, well, this is not going to happen. So you must be thinking about that, well, what can the other party do? Well, they can benefit well from the collaboration with you. So this is where it comes to the grants and the project as well. So sometimes it's not unusual in grants, well, they also need to have the compatibility in terms of the skills and the know-how, so they can strengthen the grant application. I confess I'm not too familiar in the case of India, but over in Australia, we have Australian Research Council. So those are the ones that give out, well, hundreds of thousands of dollars, actually altogether a couple $100 million each year to support research. And one of the criteria, well, they look into are the team members. They look at the skills and capability and also the past record on the skills member, are they able to deliver the project? So they need to be compatible, they need to be complementary. They also need to be a realistic workload and not just simply put down the name only. You need to have all these pre-agreed on the conditions, and also maybe how to take into consideration of the intellectual properties, well, copyrights and the patents, etc. And also maybe, well, you need to have some kind of involvement with the legal department or the contract and liability. So this is the one that mainly, if you are some kind of academic staff, you have some ideas in mind that if you think that you may generate the commercial value, so you must make sure that all this have been sorted out beforehand. Management team. So I would say personally, your time management is very important. So obviously, well, nowadays, well, when we look in the academic career, so you would have well, again, outside we have one of the three categories. You have research only, you have a teaching only, you have a research and teaching. So that would depending on the workload you have, well, maybe around 20%, 40% of research. Well, it all depends on your arrangement. So you really need to balance your time. I have already mentioned that dealing with the collaborators and co-author, all those things, you need to manage the human resource management. Well, there could be research students, research assistants, colleagues, and outside collaborators. And if you are lucky enough to working on grants, but the money involved could be $100,000. Well, even if some of our outside over here, if you're working on a big project, maybe even millions of dollars, you need to make sure go through all the rules and regulations, because, well, if it is a government money, public money, it's very important to follow all the rules. And also, what are the do's and don'ts, okay? So make sure that, well, if the regulations say that you can only use for this purpose, you use that for that purpose, well, because there might be legal liability as well. And also make sure the paper trails are being well kept. And also you need to keep the relationship, in particular, not only just around your people, maybe you need to go with the management on the decision makers as well, inside, outside of the organization. I'm quoting the professional organization. In my case, well, really, IEEE. I've been long-term volunteers, although I have some others, well, organization locally as well. But you need to balance out, okay? Well, don't overdo just on the volunteering job. Well, your full-time job is still important. They're the one, well, giving out the paycheck. So if I start off by writing, then looking into, well, the research proposal. So if I'm looking this one for the research student, so research student, you have to aim for admissions. You need a confirmation of candidature, and then you need to work on the research structure. May I ask how much time do I have? May I ask how much time do I have for this one, you man?
Sir, you can take time, sir. We
I
would
can take my
like
time, is it?
to hear from you. Yes,
Okay.
sir. Yes, sir. You can complete.
Yeah, if you're running out of time, you let me know, because I'm not too sure. Is there a limitation?
No, sir. If your time permits to you, then we would be loving to listen you, sir.
Okay, all right, then I'll carry on. As I said, if it's time issue, let me know then. Okay. Anyway, let's come back to the
Yes,
writing research proposal. So I'm hoping this one will help some of the students. If you want to write a proposal, in particular, looking at admission, well, looking into our university, I'm just using some of the forms so you can see that what is needed. So first of all, well, if someone, undergraduate research student, want to come into the university, don't just write to someone and say, oh, I want to work with you, all this thing. Well, I do not own the university. I have received that, well, some of these emails asking me, oh, sir, can I work with you? I read your paper, all this thing. I do not own the university. I do not admit a student as such. So if you just simply write to me asking, can I take you on as a student? I find it's really embarrassing. Well, because, well, it seems to me that you have not really read through the admission process. Well, for any, well, reputable university, they have the admission process. You need to go through a proper application forms. You need to go through, well, the documents, and then, well, they need to go through a number of checks before they offer you admission. It is not a single professor can admit it. But having said that, well, you can still write to the professor because, well, in our case, well, actually, you also need to have someone willing to work with you. So you can start off by discussing the project. That'd be quite all right. You say you're interested to that, you want to work on certain areas. Well, yes, the professor himself or herself will be able to enlighten you, or maybe that'd be acceptable. But don't just write to a person, ask someone to take you on as a student, okay? Anyway, so what is required? So I'm taking out a part of our document. You can apply for research degree at any time during the year. Okay, so this is not the same as what you have in the undergraduate, postgraduate study, whereby you start from semester. Really can come in anytime. So if you're doing a research project, you can start at any time. But except if your requirement, if there's some coursework required, because sometimes some students, they may say that, okay, you need to do some coursework before you, then you have to align with the semester time. First of all, you must see that you are eligible to apply. Okay, eligibility is really referred to what is the academic requirement. So normally we would expect to have an undergraduate with an honors equivalence, and also you're supposed to work in the different areas. In other words, well, you are not expecting to, okay, you study arts and then you try to want to be admitted into our engineering program as doing a PhD, then it's really highly unlikely. And then this is the second part I mentioned that, well, this is where you write to the supervisor, okay, because you're a potential supervisor, not necessarily the guy take you on, but at least the guy indicate is willing to work with you. And more than likely, if that is the case, he or she may be able to work with you to refine your research proposal so they can help you for admission, okay? But sometimes you don't know anybody at all, then you can write some kind of what we call the expression of interest form. So what I mean in here is, well, this is the one we received by our university. If there's no indicators, well, no indication of any particular staff involved, then, well, this expression of interest is going to circulate according to the interest of those staff. And then if someone is want to express, to put a hands up, then okay, the guy said, okay, maybe I would like to take a look at that. Then, well, you communicate with that particular staff. So that will be the only case that, but if there's no one put the hands up, then, well, more than likely our research, well, our graduate research team will not be able to offer you the admission. Then you need to write your research proposal. This is the one. I would say that, well, this may be your first major writing if you are starting a research work with us. But on that basis, then you may ask the next question. Now, how am I going to get the research topic? Because I do not know, I haven't started my research yet. So I would say that maybe these ones go back to the fundamental under your undergraduate study and maybe your personal interest. So I would say there may be two ways. So maybe you can come up with your own original proposal. So it is quite well common in the case of humanities or business, or law study, etc. But sometimes it can be some kind of topic from the researcher. The reason behind it is, well, I mentioned about research grants. So it's also not unusual that, well, some staff, some faculty members, some researchers, they have the money. And then, well, they need someone to work on a smaller part of the problem within that big project. So they may have some of those lists of projects available. So this might be one possibility. You can look at those. And a lot of time it's not uncommon, but for those staff, they might have their own, well, a website that they would have listed down for those kind of a project as well. So you can look into that. But more importantly, well, if you're doing that, make sure you read some of those papers from that researcher or supervisor. Okay, so you better know, well, the background, what are the problem they're working on before you start writing to it, to him or her. Okay, so in other words, there's two ways. Well, one is to come up with something. So you come up with something, if the supervisor find it interesting, then maybe, well, okay, they can start discuss on that. Alternatively, you look at some of those projects that have been put up, but I would strongly advise you to take a look at what is it all about. Now, this will be tied down to what you have done in your early years, well, in terms of the undergraduate, and maybe you have some possibility to you have some research, some more project as well. So you need to match it as much as possible, because you need to demonstrate you have the background, you have the capability to do it before the researcher. Because in our case, if we take on a student, actually it's quite a big responsibility on us, because we need to take see the student through all the way until the completion. Because we have one saying that, well, okay, if a student fail, actually, our university considers supervisors fail. Although they did not explicitly say this way, but what they're trying to say is, well, if you take on a student, you as a supervisor, really you take on the responsibility. You need to make sure that him or her go through the whole study, because otherwise it's a waste of time for everyone. Because the government and also the university invest quite a lot of time and resources for students. Actually, we never like to see the student fail. But unfortunately, things happen as well, because student is not going anywhere and then lots of confidence and then they quietly go away. Those are the things. So that's why it's very important. You need to have the match. And this really go back to the writing from the proposal. So you need to discuss your idea with a potential supervisor in an early stage, and they will be able to let you know which of these options may be the best for you and can offer advice on writing your research proposal. So when you write the research proposal, you need to read through some of the earlier papers, and in particular, take a look if the proposal idea is from a staff, from the professor. Make sure you read his papers or her papers. All right. Next one, how to develop it. Then of course you cannot get away. Before you write anything, you have to read as much as possible. Okay, so you have to find a topic you're passionate about. You believe that there's something. Well, there's a lot of rooms, a lot of potentials, a lot of problems you can work on. So obviously, well, there are some existing problem. Okay, nowadays I can easily drop off my head. Well, everybody talk about IoT, everybody talk about autonomous vehicle, everybody talking about well AI, computational intelligence, or quantum computing, or satellite communication, etc., etc., etc. There's no end to it. But really, you need something to match your own personal interest and your own capability as well. And you really need to read the journals article as much as possible associated with the topic. You do not need to understand everything, but quite unlikely you have the capability to understand all the mathematics. I confess I myself don't know as well. Looking at all the formulas, well, all the numbers to me. But nevertheless, well, you have to read the ideas. Well, take a good look at the abstract, take a good look at the conclusion and the introduction. So you give some ideas about what is it all about. So then you need to focus on a single research question. Now, I always try to use, well, the hourglass as an example to illustrate. So take a look on top, is very broad, and gradually narrow down, and then gradually go out again. So I always ask students to consider this way. You have an overarching research question on your head. Okay, so say for example, you may ask a question, okay, can AI replace a human intelligence? Okay, so this is really a very broad topic right on the end. And you narrow down to, okay, what do you mean by AI? What do you mean by what type of AI? I'm talking about methodology, I'm talking about the algorithm, and then how to define the human, well, intelligence. And then you just narrow down, and then go down to a very fundamental question, a very, well, narrow question. And this is the one that you are addressed by your research work, and then addressed by a thesis. Then you broaden out again, well, like the hourglass is the lower part of it. And then you look into different applications of it, different areas, how you can relate to different topics as well. So this is how I encourage my students to think along that way. But also you need to be flexible as well. Because as the research develops, it's likely that some of the initial ideas will be challenged, where you might need to change or modify your question if necessary. Personally, I've gone through that experience. I spent a couple of months on my research proposal, but at the end of it, I changed it completely. But nevertheless, well, actually, it did not change completely in the sense that because, well, I opened up with 2 questions, and then, well, I still applied relate to one another. So my postgraduate, my PhD thesis is actually quite interesting. Actually, I'm dealing with 2 topics, looking at 2 different approaches to work on that. Anyway, so you need to be flexible. You also need to be thinking about, well, how you can be adapted to the other aspect, other discipline. And also make sure keep yourself up to date. Now, early on, I mentioned about the collaboration. I mentioned about that if you are involved with the editorial team of research and the conference technical program committee, because of those opportunity, well, those positions will give you a role to read other people's paper. So apart from reviewing them, that you are also able to, well, take a look at what people are interested in, what people are working on as well. So of course, if you're a student, you may not be involved with those ones. So but you still need to keep yourself, well, you need to follow up some of the journals, specific journals, so on the topic you're interested with, and then also looking at some, what we call the flagship conferences. So those are the ones that they have published a lot of latest work on that. So it is essential to discuss your idea with your potential supervisor. I'll repeat the same statement as well. So I'm using an example to illustrate. Okay, this is the one that our university application form for admission for the scholarship. And you can see that we have really a lot of degrees available. We have a research degree. Well, in general, they want a PhD, but we also have a lot we call the professional degree, doctorate as well. We got Doctor of IT, Doctor of Psychology, Doctor of Business, Doctor of Education, etc. So in general, from the government point of view, well, the professional doctorate and the research degree doctorate is the same, actually. So although there's some other master degree, well, research training. So I'm referring to the doctorate degree. Well, in the case of Australian government, we have this, we call it AQF, Australian Qualification Framework. So all the doctorate degree are level 10. This is the top of it. And then we have a certain expected outcome. Say, for example, it should be gone through an independent research, and then able to, to demonstrate, you're able to communicate, you're able to make a contribution, etc., etc. So those are the things we have. Although in practice, well, we do consider professional degree are the one to specify making the contribution to the profession. So if we say that, okay, if it is a doctorate of IT, that means that we expect, well, the work is entirely making a contribution to the IT industry or IT profession. Well, a PhD degree is much more general, just in terms it implies. But nevertheless, well, if you look into our forms, okay, so we are much more general, okay, on the personal details, because I would like to point out to you what you should look into in terms of our expectation on the research proposal writing. So we have our English requirements, obviously, for those people coming in from a non-English speaking background. We have enrollment details of what type of degree one want to apply. As you can see, we have the same forms for the scholarship. Our university have two types of scholarship for our postgraduate student. Well, one is the Australian, international postgraduate scholarship. This is the one that are provided by the government. We also have the Murdoch research studentship as well. That is one from our university. Although in terms of the what they provide is to provide the school fee and also stipends, living allowance as well. In terms of the money they give is quite compatible. Although that the university also try to encourage the student having the high academic credential, give them the additional bonus as well. Those are the two scholarships, as you can see in here. International Postgraduate Research Scholarship, IPRS, and the Murdoch International Postgraduate Scholarship, MIPS. So you select it. So it's important to illustrate that you're able to demonstrate you have a certain degree of a research experience, okay? Now, actually in the past, or when I was working in a university, I was also the Dean of the Research Study and also the in the research degree and the scholarship committee. We also see a lot of academic staff, actually, they come to apply for scholarship and stay. Actually, it happens before as well. So this will really help because a lot of time the academic staff, well, in a way that they have much more experience, they have a research output already. So this is where we see the research experience. Well, they might be in some kind of research full-time staff before, a full-time job before, maybe they're working in the study, they have some full-time project. And then you need to substantiate. As you can see, the citation details should be in a standard format, like the journals, like the books and chapters, and also research outputs. It could be a conference proceedings. It could be a public exhibition if there's some people in art area, etc. So what I'm trying to say is, well, even looking into admission for scholarship, actually, if you're able to demonstrate you have the research experience and you have the output in terms of the writing in the journals, proceedings, well, it helps already. So, but in terms of the actual work, this is where the research topic and the proposal need to write in. So as you can see, we expect the student will put in a writing of between 300 to 500 words. So you need to summarize what is your research aims, what is the likely question you're asking, and also the possible outcomes of the proposed project. Now, this is for admission only, okay? But in a way, it may also help you in terms of the scholarship, because if it is in some of the priority area, actually this will give the student an extra bonus in terms of the gaining the ranking on the scholarship. So after the student being admitted, in our case, the student have to spend around 6 months of full-time study. At the end of the full-time study, the student need to go through this process of confirmation of candidature. As you can see, the number of words actually now has to be increased to around 3,000 to 4,000 words. Up to this point, that we would expect the student have gone through 6 months full-time study, entirely on research, writing a proposal, and more or less this is the plan. This is where what you intend to do, why you want to do it, how you see that the outcome from your work. So you could be also maybe some kind of academic writing analysis, mainly this is for the arts of those people, English writing, those kind of work. And also we do have some kind of programs that the student need to go through some of the basic stuff, and then the online orientation, all the other stuff. What I'm trying to say is really mainly in terms of this research proposal, this is really the main thing. Because if you consider the student, our expected time is 3 years, 3.5 years, at the most 4 years. This really make up around at least around 20% of the student time, of the overall course of study. So we would expect a substantial work from here. It's not unusual that during my time, I have a lot of students. I would expect they would have even published 1 or 2 papers by then. So for your research proposal, this is a general write-up. You need to give the introduction. You need to have a brief overview of the research projects. And then you need to give the background of the work. This is where you have spent a lot of time in reading. This is what comes in. You need to summarize what other people have done. And also more importantly, what is the significance of your work? So just simply finding a new way to solve a problem is not the justification of why you want to work on that. But if your new way of solving the problem give you some benefit, and this will be your significant, this will be important. So the methodology, you also need to explain. Now you haven't done the project yet, but you need to explain clearly what are you going to do, or what are the steps. so that you know that what you're doing, so that, well, the university having confidence that you are able to complete your degree in 3 years' time. And of course, you need to provide the references. Well, by then I would expect you would have done at least around 30 or 40 references in detail. You know, what is it all about? So this is what we would expect to see a reasonable, well, research proposal after, well, 6 months of full-time study. Then after, well, you've continued the work, then, well, once you engage of your study, now you've gone through the candidateship, then some of the tangible outcome will be your publication, your papers. Then the first thing you need to answer is, where should I publish my work? Because by now, you should know your work should be significant, because you have gone through all this work, you have framed your research question, you have put down your methodology, you start to experiment, you collect your data, you need to write up your papers so as to disseminate, well, your results. And you need to ask the first question, where will I publish it? Where should I publish it? So these are the things you need to take into consideration. Now, of course, well, from our university nowadays, as I have mentioned, the university and the government actually have some kind of assessment on that. So they come in some kind of what we call a ranking, which again, I will show you later on, Australia experience, what do we mean by the ranking? I'm talking mainly from our IT discipline. But I personally having a little bit of issue in that, because what it means is everyone is aiming, well, for the top journals or top conferences. Unfortunately, a lot of time, those the acceptance rate is pretty low. So it's not unusual that people keep on having the reject. Well, actually, right now, I have one student, actually, she has been rejected 3 times already. It's not that her work is not great, but then again, well, we find that maybe from the venue she submitted may not be too appropriate for her work. So to me, that, well, she is suffering a little bit of discouragement because of all the rejection. So to me, it's not really a good thing, because, well, I believe the student need to see the tangible outcome. So it's very important for you to identify, well, where should you publish, well, your work. If I use the IEEE as an example, so maybe you take a look, first of all, well, there are a lot of revenues started off with maybe some non-refereed. Now you will see that, well, I would encourage, well, don't think that publishing in a journal is the end. Actually, it should be the outcomes of what all your work have done. What I mean is you should have started writing a lot. You have started really putting things in the public even before you really put in your journals and your conference proceeding. So this is what I refer to the non-refereed publication. It could be some internal presentation. Okay, so, well, when I run my research group, I would expect my students to do a presentation once every week. Sometimes they say, oh, I've already done it last week. I'll keep on saying that you have to do it, because you have to convince not me, you have to convince yourself. You really know exactly what you're doing, so you should write your internal reports. Well, sometimes, well, nowadays it's not unusual. People can really start to write your own blogs or in the social media. Well, write it LinkedIn. So it's not unusual. You can do that. There's no, well, demand or requirement. You can write in and people can comment it. It really help you a lot as well. Obviously, even books and book chapter, actually, sometimes they are not even refereed, so it may help you. But as a student, well, you may not be working up to that point. But it's not unusual. People writing encyclopedia, then inviting you writing article. Actually, also this happen as well. But of course, well, from the academic point of view, people will value, well, if your work are being peer reviewed. So this is where the refereed venue comes in. It could be as simple as an abstract, letters. It could be conference papers, a journal transaction, and magazines articles as well. Most importantly, you need to take a good look at the venue. What is the theme? What is the objective of that journal, conference, etc.? You need to match the requirement. Recently, I have just reviewed some submission going to the IEEE computer magazine. Unfortunately, I have to turn it down. It's not so much that the writing is no good, well, it's reasonable, but then again, well, if the work is not really appropriate, well, to the magazine, then unfortunately I have to turn it down, because, well, it is not really appropriate value. So in IEEE, people normally assess it, but based on the transaction, well, or the journals. Well, in a way that, well, these two, the definition is little bit blurred nowadays, actually. Well, but sometimes it will be dependent on number of pages. But IEEE will define the transaction normally between 8 to 10 printed pages, or 20 to 24 to 30 double-spaced pages. So you can see this is really quite substantial amount of work. And then the journal is really similar length as a transaction, but also focus on selected topics and more specialized area of interest. So really depending, well, the work you're putting in. I didn't mention about the magazine, quite similar. So if you compare the length, actually conference proceeding normally is much less. So personally, I always encourage my students to start off writing well, as a conference papers first. And then, well, if you have a 1 or 2 conference papers, you can always combine them to be a much more substantial journal papers. And then ultimately, the journal papers could become a chapter as well in the thesis. So by doing that, it really helps. And nowadays, actually, there is another ways to publish your thesis. Well, what we call the thesis by publication. So that means university regulation also allowed the student put in a couple of papers. Well, mainly I personally consider you need to be a good journal, and then you compile it to be a thesis. So that's another way to do your publication. Also explain why it's good to help you, to write good papers. And also there might be some smaller size of the papers called the letters. They're generally much more shorter number of papers, well, approximately 3 to 4 printed pages or 9 double-spaced pages. So those are the things you need to consider. Well, I do not go too detailed in all these because they will depend very much on the society, technical society in IEEE. I think we have 36 or so, or 39 technical society. And then, well, each one of them, they have their number of flagship publication or transaction. So you really have to look at each one of them individually so that you follow the papers, you follow the requirements. Conference, normally we refer to the proceedings. So they are reviewed within a specific time frame. Now, one of the advantages, well, for conference papers is because they're much more shorter, apart from the length, but also they're able to publish faster as well. They have a pretty tight, well, timeline because they know that the days of the conferences, they work backwards, well, how many days they require for the reference and all those things. So this is unlike the journal. It's not unusual. Journals, even you got your papers accepted, they might need to go through a couple of rounds of modification. It's not unusual. I've seen some papers, well, from the time of first submission until the time appear in the journal, it takes 2 years. So for a PhD study, maybe it takes too long. You may not have enough time, well, for the paper even come on the publication. So the conference paper is good, it's better in the sense that you got limitation of time, much more faster. And also this is the venue whereby you have a discussion, a presentation for people within the same area and the problem. And also conference is also good because I also consider a good learning experience from conference is to listen to the keynote speakers. Sometimes they also have the workshops and tutorials, and you can also learn from that as well. So you could also be invited, well, to publish in the journals after the further extension and reviews of your paper. So again, you can have extension of that. So that's why I would consider if you are really at the beginning of your research career, academic career, well, start off with looking at conferences. Well, and then from there, you can expand, go into the journals. Now, of course, there are some other consideration, maybe like the cost. But this go back to the COVID-19 have changed the ball game now. Because in the past conferences, you need to attend there personally. But now, since the COVID-19, we have a lot of those on the virtual conferences. And even IEEE, now we begin to recognize, well, what we call the new form is called the hybrid. That means that you can have the both online and also in presence format as well. So things is going to change for sure. The journals, well, they are periodical publications. You need to work on the specific disciplines or the interest. And also the publication will go through a few rounds of a meticulous peer reviews process. They even may go down to the editorial, well, formatting. They even go through the one final round before they put in the publication. So there might be some special issues as well. So sometimes you might have a regular journals, but have additional, well, special issues. Sometimes they are free to publish. Sometimes if they open access, then you need to pay for the publication fee. Be very careful on this because they are a publisher. They're only out for your money. So even though that, well, they accept a paper, they may come back with no really a reasonable review, and even, well, the names, well, I would not even associate with that because some of them, they may not be even recognized by the university or the government. So you be very careful on those publications. On the conference itself, well, you need to select it. First of all, well, is a theme relevant to your work? So is it difficult to get accepted? So sometimes if it's an ongoing conference, well, you may check the previous, well, writing to tell you, well, what is the acceptance rate? Well, in IEEE format, we would expect, well, you shouldn't be anything, well, more than 50% or so, although we have seen some conferences that accept higher than that. But I would say that if a conference were accepting too high the percentage, it have a little bit issue, well, as far as we are concerned on the quality. On the other hand, we have also seen some conferences, they are very hard to get in, even more difficult than the journal. I have seen some conference, maybe, well, I was involved on a conference where the initial round, only around 9% of the papers are being accepted. Although after second round, it goes around 15% or so. But there are conferences where they could be very difficult to get in. Well, of course, well, from most of the researchers and student point of view, they need to be indexed so they can help you with your for your requirements. And also, you have to ask yourself, well, what do you expect to get from the publishing the papers or the conference? Well, you need to find out, well, who are the one organizing it, or who are the keynote speaker? Well, what other add-on facilities you can benefit from it? Well, even including the industry or the social visits, but of course, there's a cost involved as well. So from Australia, well, experience, well, our government actually, well, in IT discipline, well, there are, well, we have one organization we go call and whereby recommended the list of the conferences and the journal. Although I myself is having a little bit issue in that, although there have been a lot of comment and criticism on the system because on the selection of those journals and the conferences, but nevertheless has been used by a lot of the universities as well. So the CORE stands for the Computing Research and Education Association of Australasia, and then they have come up with the list, well, of the conferences. So I'm not going to elaborate on this one because it depends very much if people want to adopt it or not, although I'm not, well, I personally don't require it nowadays, but then again, well, my students may still require that. But nevertheless, they do have the conference ranking. So they have the ranking, well, based on recommendation, well, by a committee. And then they have the rankings were based on number of indicators, in terms of citation rate, the paper submission acceptance rate, feasibility, the people running it, etc. Then they come up with the ranking like the A star, A, B, C, D, they call it local, unranked, national, etc. Now, please don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that for conference is not ranked, is a bad conference. I'm not saying that at all. Because sometimes you could have a new topic whereby a conference is beginning, well, working on that. So this is actually, to me, is a golden opportunity to work on a new field. But because there's no track record, so unfortunately, the conference may not be ranked. And unfortunately, sometimes university may not support that as well. So as I said, everybody will aim for the A star at the beginning. Well, you load it, well, with so many applications, submission, it's very difficult to get in. So I would be realistic as far as our students concerned. Well, we tell them, okay, looking for A or B. Although C, sometimes, well, the university may not recognize it because, well, we don't even support it, or maybe even they discourage, well, putting in some conferences that are not ranked. Although, as I said, well, I'm not 100% agreeable with that, but nevertheless, that's what's happening. So what I'm trying to say is, well, this is what's happening from our experience. And similarly, thing is being done, well, for our journal as well, but I'm not going through that. So there are a lot of other lists looking at all this. I mentioned about the bail list, although this one has been taken out now because of the fear of some legal action against them. But what is trying to indicate, well, some of those predatory, well, open access, well, publisher, because they're out to get the money. So, but nevertheless, there are quite a number of these ranking and listing. So it's up to you for you to look into. So from the conference point of view, well, our IEEE, we have the Technical Program Integrity Initiative. Mainly, well, what we look at the quality is based on two aspects. Are the papers, well, within the scope of the conference, within the scope of IEEE, and also the general quality. The general quality, we're referring to the write-up in terms of the English, the grammar, the layout, and all those things. Strictly speaking, we are not really going too detailed into the research contribution, although implicitly there's expected indication as well. So we also, well, look at other attributes, say for example, like the acceptance rates, etc. So as I have said, we are chartered with the task that we have to decide the sum of all the conference materials are not acceptable for explore. Sometimes it's not unusual. We send it back to the organizer. We tell them, look here, some of the papers are not within our scope, or can you remove that? But we are not in the position to review the whole conference for them. So we will just let them do it and they come back to us and then we have a second look. Well, it might be acceptable, it may not be. So what I'm trying to say is, if you are organizing a conference, if you're submitting a paper to the conference, be very careful. Okay, make sure that, well, take a look at the past, well, papers in those journals, in those conference proceedings. So make sure that they're good quality. Otherwise, you don't want to have a risk whereby this is going to be rejected by IEEE. So our role is also provide some kind of guideline. How do we provide, remove the materials and also recommend some kind of corrective actions as well. So this has been my role. One of the worst things can happen is, even though the conference has been accepted, so, but then again, if something wrong with the paper, of course, one of the obvious thing is plagiarism. The plagiarism, well, nowadays we have tools to check it. But we also have a general comment, well, on the quality of it. Sometimes, unfortunately, if you take a look at Explore, there's some papers, I would say that it's not worth the money to download it, but unfortunately it happens. But the worst case, it could be some kind of problem in it. Say, for example, if it's an outright copy from another one, so there's something is no, or maybe something fundamentally been wrong. And also we receive complaint, well, from public or maybe from our partners indexing organization. It could happen that the paper even published in Explore, it will be asked to withdraw and retract it. So when you look into the papers, the Explore, even though they have been accepted, even the conference have been accepted, even the paper has been appeared in Explore, but some point later, you need to be retracted. So this is what you see. So on the Explore. So after careful and considered review of the content of the paper by an expert committee, the paper has been found to be in violation of the principle, and then it has been withdrawn. Okay, this is the last thing you want to happen. But then again, this doesn't happen too often, but unless there's really some major problem with the papers, okay? Now, I would say that our committee has been quite good in picking up the plagiarism. And also in the past, we have issues like the machine-generated paper as well. So some people really try to trap us, but it happened before. You also try to use it to trap the organizer. They put in one machine-generated paper, it's completely irrelevant. And then surprisingly, the paper being accepted and being published, and then you cause an embarrassment to IEEE and embarrassment to the organizer as well. So I would say it's very important, and I hope this will not happen to any one of you in the audience as well. Okay, now let me finish off the last part. I came across this article where when I'm preparing, this one was being written in 2013 by someone called Rauch Petro-Viga. I don't know the person, but I think the topic really caught my attention. I said that my top 10 academic productivity tips, or how I submitted 5 places in 3 weeks. So let's take a look, well, at this person. I don't know him, so I do a little bit of Google Scholar on him, and they find out that, okay, he got a 744 citations, well, 15 H index. So I wouldn't consider he's a very high, maybe he's very young researcher, etc. So I'm not looking at that point, but really I'm looking at the 10 points he mentioned. And I must confess, well, I have made use some of those as well. But his recommendation is you really need to write every day. And I believe it is true as well, but I would add on to that one, you need to read every day as well. If you remember, one of the earlier points I said, when you prepare for your research topics, you need to read a lot. It cannot be understated as well. Well, he is talking about from the researcher point of view. Well, he was a student. Well, he is an academic staff, and he's asking for teaching release. So what he's trying to say is, well, okay, if you can dedicate more time to research, you need that. So again, this depends very much on the university and how you do it. In our case, I mentioned that we do have, well, in our university, every 3 years, we can apply for a study leave for 6 months. Alternatively, every 10 years or so, we have what we call the long service leave. Some people make use of those time as well. So in other university, maybe 7 years, they got sabbatical leave. So people also make use of those time. That's not a holiday time, but rather they use that time as a full-time, well, research that they will help. Research assistant. Now, of course, this depends very much on the budget. And say, for example, well, it is possible if you got a grant, but I would expand this one, looking at the research student. Well, I would say that looking at my research output, I'm in debt to a lot of my research students. I would say that all my work actually are my students' work and not my work. I only help, I will work with them, I put them a guideline. So it really help you to increase your output and productivity. You really have to work with other people. And also working on a number of projects in parallel. And I think this is also useful because if you take a look at my output, a lot of them you see is working on diverse topics as well. It will also help you partly to broaden out and also increase your probability of being acceptance, because a lot of time you work on a single problem. And then if there's something, well, you've got a bottleneck, well, you're not able to get a breakthrough, then your publication output will be stored. So if you have a multiple project, then this one, well, maybe, hopefully you will reduce the possibility. So this is again where the number 3 point come in. You're working with the research student, working with the research assistant to help you enhance that one. You cannot get away from submit again. So you really have to keep on trying. And of course, while you're talking about the personal management, he suggests that you really have the office environment whereby you can enable you to spread out all your papers and all those things. Okay, this is very personal. I think I'll leave it up to you to work whatever the environment best for you. You need to be organized and disciplined. Again, this one, well, cannot be understated, because if you go back to the earlier part, you need to read every day. Well, you need to write every day. You need to work on all the plans. If I have mentioned earlier on, you really need to be organized and disciplined. I think also another one is very important, learn to say no. In particular, well, when my involvement with the IEEE, with the voluntary organizations, sometimes you have to say no. Well, even though that, well, sometimes if you have done something, your output, well, people get to know you, and more people start knocking on your door, and up to the point that you need to say no. There's so much time you have. This will come back to your management plan. You have to keep going and don't get discouraged. As I mentioned, my student right now, actually, she has submitted, got rejected 3 times already. So my role is really keep on encouraging her, that really try to help her to improve the paper, looking for alternative venue for this publication of her work. Then you also need to reward yourself with each success. Well, what I'm trying to say is, well, do not just simply get too discouraged and just overboard down with all the work. Well, you need to really, slow down a little bit and have a break every now and then. And if you got something, get it recognized and share with your joy with your colleague and the family as well. So I would say that personally, I find that some of these are really relevant, and I also make use of this, and I also hope that this will help you as well. So in summary, and you and I now agree that research writing and publication is really an integral part of our academic and research career now. And you really need to plan early. So this is where I mentioned a couple of plans. I hope that you can think about and consider that. You also need to utilize the opportunity with limited resources. Unfortunately, nowadays, really resources are limited everywhere, including your own time and your own energy. So conferences are good venues to publish and to network other people. So although nowadays with the virtual conferences, you may not have so much opportunity to have interact other people on the social aspect, but nevertheless, it's still good to know other people. So it's important to choose the most appropriate venue to disseminate and release your research result. I think it's very important, because you do not really just aim for the top level and then you got rejected all the time. So you really need to be realistic. Okay, so don't think about publish or perish. I know that this one places so much pressure on a lot of staff and students. Unfortunately, I can see some of my students that really under so much stress. But I always want to encourage them. I believe that you should believe in yourself, because if you've done your work, you have read up, you know that your work should be substantial, that you will get published somewhere. So I always try them to think about publish and prosper. Okay, do not think about publish or perish, but publish and prosper. So that's what I have to share with you. And thank you so much again for the opportunity. And this was my picture I took on the last day of 2020. So just get yourself ready for 2021. Okay. Good luck with your research and publication. And I stop my sharing and now pass the time back to you now, Mac. Thank you so much for your time. And I'm sorry that I've taken quite a fair bit of time.
Thank you so much, sir, for knowledge enriching and enlightening and provoking thoughts with the participants. Sir truly said that publication is very important in the academic career, as researchers provide the researcher with the information and knowledge, and academic articles improvise on one's own research skills. Research and publications are crucial and essential to grow and prospect in an academic career. How we should take care of citations and indexing to keep it with trained, what should be the publication plan, and how many papers we need to publish, frequency of the publication, worthiness of the publication material, and where should I publish the paper. Important measurables after the publication of paper. Thank you, sir, for depth insight on this questionnaires, which should be well known to each researcher and academician. Thank you so much, sir. And now I would be requesting participants, if they are having a question, they can ask. They can put the question into the chat box. If participants are having a question.
Yeah, it would be good you put in the chat box so I can read out to everyone. Have you enabled the chat facility for everyone?
Yes, sir. Sir, I'm having one question.
Okay.
That traditionally, reviewing time of manuscript was minimum 4 months and up to 1.5 years or more. In today's scenario, usually all journals are getting open access and APC, no charges with readers, but with authors as article publication charges. Their review timing is comparatively less, in fact. So will it impact on the quality of papers, and what would be the perception towards the author publication in that regard?
Yes, as a matter of fact, it is a valid issue dealing with the open access publisher. Actually, we do have concern that some of the open access publisher, actually, they are just out there for the money. So from Australian point of view, we do have our access. Well, interestingly, our university, actually, we do not support paying for the publication. So So although I'm not 100% saying that every one of them are out to get their money, but then again, they are reputable. So ultimately, I would say that there's no single formula saying that you should or should not do it, but really come back to do a good study, well, on the journal, the venue, that really is it reputable or not. Okay, so I do agree with you, actually. Well, that's why I said that even IEEE, we're exploring, well, the open access venue. And actually, on conference itself, actually, now we are even open up to another mode. Is what we call the,
Yes.
that they release the proceedings for 30 days before the conference itself. So people can two ways. One is only open to the authors or to the conference delegates, and the other one is open to the public. Okay, that's quite interesting, well, approach. In other words, people can look at the conference proceeding before the conference. Okay, so by doing that, well, you open up, well, the chances of people more ready that if they want to ask a question in the conference, they know what to ask. Okay, so we haven't yet to see that one, but that one is happening right now. So there are a lot of things that are happening right now. So I'll come back to your comment. I perfectly agree with you. The open access is something you need to consider very carefully. You do not really want to put your money into some publisher that whereby you do not want to associate that with your name.
Okay, thank you, sir. On behalf of Institute, I am thankful to our distinguished speaker, Professor Lance Fung, sir, for accepting our request and being with us today for sharing eminence knowledge with our faculty and students. It would be really nice whenever you visit India, sir, please share your plan with us. We will look forward to have among us in our institute as well. And your thought and knowledge will be a source of motivation with our faculty colleagues and students. Thank you so much, sir, for being with us and sparing your valuable time with us. And we do not have words, and we are only having a word, that is thank you so much. You were having a limited time, and you take a time and share your eminence knowledge. Thank you so much, sir.
Okay, once again, thank you so much for the invitation, and I hope everyone's successful and keep safe and just stay happy. Okay, be productive as well.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, bye-bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye, sir.
Okay, have a good day, everyone. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.